We're going to make this fun. My name is Ariel Cathcart. I am the CEO and founder of AC Powers, and I'm also Associate Director at Every Town for Gun Safety, and I lead our mayor's work under Mayors Against Illegal Guns. So essentially, I work with mayors all across the country in reducing gun violence in their city.
Just wanted to remind you all to speak slowly, please, for the translation.
If I can put it in a way to talk about what I believe this conversation will be about, public safety, we talk about it in many different ways, and a lot of times it goes back to law enforcement and tough on crime, and I think it's a time now to stop, going from, community versus like crime. I think public safety is more than just enforcement and punishment. It's all about investment. And so I have these beautiful people to the left of me. I was going to introduce y'all, but I feel like y'all talk about yourself better than I would talk about yourself. And so you can start at this part, and then we can go down and we can start the conversation.
All right, thank you. So I'm Jeffrey Glover. I'm the director for the Arizona Department of Public Safety, and I'm also the president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement, which is NOBLE. So I've been working in law enforcement for over 27 years, had a lot of great mentors over the years. Many of them have been instrumental in my success over the years, and NOBLE has been an organization that's poured in a lot into me to be successful, to be the first black chief of police in Tempe, Arizona, and first public safety director for the state of Arizona. And so I just wanted to, make sure that I give thanks to those that came before me. And one on the panel today here that was a good mentor of mine over the years as well. So it's a pleasure to be able to speak, and it's definitely an honor to be here today.
Hello, Deanna Hoskins. I'm currently President CEO of Just Leadership USA. Just Leadership is the only national organization founded by and operated by formerly incarcerated individuals, and we invest in their leadership across the country to educate, empower, and elevate their voices to dismantle the policies that continue to oppress us. I'm currently serving as a White House Fellow. A White House Fellow. Under the Biden administration, I was appointed. So I got to just start saying that. But no, prior to that, prior to Just Leadership, I was the first formerly incarcerated hired by the Department of Justice in a career position of leadership, and ran the Federal Interagency on Reentry, which was over 20 federal agencies coming together to help remove barriers within our community.
All right, thank you. I am Andre Anderson, and I am the police chief in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I have served in law enforcement for 37 years. I am most known for serving as the interim police chief in Ferguson post Michael Brown. I was asked to go there to help reconcile the community and introduce a lot of police reform and some of the things we'll talk about today. And I also spent a lot of time also in Rochester, New York, after they had significant levees there as well. But I spent 28 years of my career in Glendale, Arizona, where I had an opportunity to serve at every level of leadership. But I will say this, I am the special assistant to the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. I am Chief Glover's assistant. And as he talks about mentoring, there's one thing to create a succession plan, right? Because I'm an older brother than Jeffrey here. But what I found is we always saw great promise in him. And for you to help develop and help someone to actually ascend beyond yourself, which was always a goal, we were very pleased. We knew he could do it. He's doing it. He's going to continue to do it. This is a strong brother right here, and he is a fantastic leader. So I am pleased to be here, and thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. So I want to start the panel off with more of a personal question. We all do this work for a reason, and me in general, I lost two of my brothers in 2019 and 2021 to gun violence. And we know that public safety isn't just policy, it's like people's real lives. So my question is, I want to hear from each of you, what moment in your career or in your life made this work personal for you?
I would say, starting with me, what made it personal for me is there was a few things. My father was incarcerated in 1976. He still is. So he's been there a long time. That was tough to learn about. And that became personal because for many years I didn't have my biological dad. So that was an issue for me. Then I had a number of relatives that throughout my life living in Philadelphia, where I'm from, the Eagles won the Super Bowl, right? Just kind of reminded people that. I spent a lot of time listening to people that I grew up with that I really had a lot of respect for, and I saw them arrested time and time again, and there weren't any resources. And it wasn't just one thing, it was a culmination of things in the community that kind of had an impact on me. In terms of things, not only just seeing people shot and killed through gun violence, but seeing what the impact of the police and perhaps maybe not taking measures to try to intervene. So it was more than one issue.
Thank you. For me, it was personal. Struggled with a drug addiction for over 15 years. And when I was incarcerated and sentenced, the judge gave me 3 directives. Don't use drugs, get a job, and get custody of your kids back. Well, getting custody of my kids was easy because my family was like, welcome home, here they go. The job became an issue. And what I discovered was there were policies, or I had skill sets that I had taken prior to my incarceration, and people would say, we want to hire you contingent on a background. They would then run the background and rescind the offer. So I started asking employers for a letter stating that because I needed to show the judge and my probation officer I was actively searching for a job, but I wasn't getting anywhere because of my record. Then I remembered one job I walked out of, and I turned around and I asked the HR person, I said, can you give me a copy of the policy so I can sit down with my judge and my probation officer? And she said, there isn't a policy, it's just how we do business. And at that moment, I realized society was creating barriers based on implicit bias of what they thought, and it was not policy on paper. So I started researching, and I realized why formerly incarcerated are not a protected class. There is a clause in the Civil Rights Act that says you cannot discriminate against a disparate population. So when employers say we don't hire people with criminal convictions, felons, or misdemeanors, they are outright discriminating against African Americans and Latinas who are arrested and convicted at a higher rate. So we tested it a little further, and we filed with EEOC, and we ended up suing BMW, Pepsi-Cola, and Family Dollar for that policy, which led to DOL sending out memos that even job centers or nothing can post a posting that says nobody without a criminal conviction can hire, that it is actually a federally illegal posting. So it all started personally. I did not want to do policy. I just wanted a job.
So it's an interesting question, what started this off for me, because statistically I'm not supposed to be here at all. Yeah. I was never supposed to make it this far. I was never supposed to live past the age of 25, in which my teachers told me that. I'm originally born from 2 teenage parents and was raised in split time between Compton, California and Phoenix, Arizona. And for all intents and purposes, the thought process was, well, if you can just manage to stay out of trouble and get a job, you've made it. But what led me down this path was just a chance opportunity that, and it was really just like a gift from God, because the reality was that I never wanted to get into law enforcement at all, especially experiencing what I had experienced growing up, seeing most of my relatives incarcerated, seeing most of my relatives on drugs, seeing many of them that were out there on the streets hustling. I typically would avoid cops, not just because of the stigma that was aligned with it. It was just the fact that there was so much associated with everything around me that I felt sort of guilty about that, and I shouldn't be anywhere near anybody, especially law enforcement. But I ended up getting a job with the city of Phoenix. Just so happens, Parks and Recreation, they ended up saying, hey, you know what, within 2 months of me being there, like, we got this grant position. We want you to work in this position. And I was like, well, what's the details? Well, you got to work with the police. And I'm like, no. and from there, they were like,
right?
they were like, hey, look, we'll pay you X amount of money and this and that and everything. And I was just starting college, so I'm like, okay, and I'm paying for it myself. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna see if I can work this out. So working with these officers there, but it was a youth program that was driven to getting many of our vulnerable youth off the street that were getting picked up for curfew violation, and they were getting involved in gang violence. And so through that work, I found a place where it was unique, because it was like, I'm seeing the changes that they're making in the lives of these young men and women that are trying to develop and trying to just like make it in life. And I could see myself in many of these people that they were picking up, and then they're bringing them to me, and then I'm able to actually counsel them. And I'm doing this work within this diversion program. So from there, I ended up gravitating into law enforcement, but never did I even anticipate that I would ever even be in this field.
In each one of y'all's explanation, I keep hearing a theme of having to rebuild trust, like with just where you are, who's in leadership. Chief Anderson, I wanted to ask you a question. You've been in leadership dealing with unrest and distrust of police. What's actually working to repair relationships between communities and law enforcement? And Glover, you can answer that as well.
So the question is what is working to rebuild trust? One of the things that we have to understand is that crime is an illness, and that there's many things that we need to do collaboratively to address those types of concerns, and arresting people is not the solution. So the first thing that we have to do in policing is we have to create positive frequency of interaction. The people in the community, for those that may have involved or engaged in issues, we had to embrace the community policing philosophy that allows for them to see us as regular people, see us as common, see us as individuals who have a desire to help, and be a bridge to get individuals in the community to resources, whether it be jobs, mental health, things of that nature. Those are the real issues that help to solve issues. And it also allows for people to start developing trust by just being authentic and genuine and being less judgmental. I think there's this stigma with the police having this judgment towards people that creates an impediment, and it doesn't allow for us to bridge the gap. We just had to come as our real self, genuine, and just try to help people to the best of our ability, using the vast resources to assist with our efforts.
So just to build off of that too, when you're talking about trust, legitimacy, and making sure that that we're actually having a meaningful connection with our community members, one of the things that I believe in is really sort of like ecosystem driven type initiatives, where when you're looking at the perspective of engaging your community, you have to ask them how they want to be policed. You have to ask them, what initiatives that you want to take part in. You have to allow for them to have skin in the game. A couple of different things that I did when I was a chief in Tempe was, for instance, we have quality of life issues when it comes to traffic safety. I had some of the main individuals that were complaining about certain areas within the city where you're having, issues with fatalities and or just crashes that were impacting their quality of life. And it was bringing many of those people into the police department, bring them to the table, sit down, ask them, hey, who are some of the other people that we need to bring to the table? I want you to have ownership in what we do and how we move forward to be able to address the issues. And so it's things like that where you're bringing community in to have a voice That's what this is all about. It's about them being able to have some type of activation so that way they understand that you are a part of the solution and you can help design the solution to the problem. When he talked about frequency of interaction, like coffee with community instead of just coffee with the cop, this is about community. So it's not just about us. You need to see us, but you need to see other people. So when I would do those type of programs, I'm bringing in mental health clinicians because those are some of the folks that when we are out there in the field, when the officers are out there in the field and they're having to turn something over to a crisis mobile team, you need to know exactly what their capabilities are as a community member. So federal agencies, bringing those individuals in, bringing the courts in, bringing in the county attorneys, those are things that I think it's important to make sure people are educated on so that way they have the sort of the full viewpoint of exactly how the system works, but also where the system fails. So that way they can get an understanding of it, and then they can come back to us with feedback and say, hey, here's some things, some gaps that I'm recognizing where we need to change.
Yeah, that's you made a point because you talk about the ecosystem. A lot of people work in silos, and what I've been doing a lot with mayors is making them look at their prosecutor office, making them look at their county, their health department, and figure out how you can do a whole solution. So we know what's been happening over the last couple of weeks. We have had a shift in administration, and Ms. Fellow, who's been under Biden, I would love to ask you, as far as in the context of policy, and I've heard you said something earlier, so share as much as you want, and even in policing, how are you going to still push those same policies that work forward and that what you've learned off of lived experience, even with them not like actually believing in it? And then also, when it comes to policing, when they're going back into this level of law and order and they're not bringing funding or dollars for community and coffee, and how do y'all plan to engage that and move through those obstacles? Deanna.
So thank you for that. I think it's understanding that advocacy has different levels of how you say it. So I always say that advocacy starts with the T-shirt and the bullhorn in the middle of the street. We saw that with Black Lives Matter. Once you got our attention, what's the plan, right? So once you get people's attention, who's going to sit at the table? How are you going to communicate how policies are harming your community? But also, and I use this a lot in my everyday life, I don't have to like a person to get my agenda across the table, right? I have to find opportunities that may be allowed to be there. And I think the best opportunity is when you can humanize the situation, and especially now when the person sitting on the other side of power has that same lived experience, right? Because it still may be a social distance. There are still little, what I call agitators that matter. And I shared with the group that my organization, we put out a roadmap for every administration on actions that can be taken that will give relief to people who are formerly incarcerated. And we break it down into what are executive actions the president can do, what are administrative actions that cabinet leaders can do without legislation, what I call the gray area. Then, of course, there's legislation and there's constitutional reform. Well, every administration since Obama, we've put in language matters. A lot of people don't know there's a formerly incarcerated individual named Eddie Ellis who led this Language Matters. He penned the most famous note called Don't Call Me Convict. Because when you call me a convict, you're actually holding me to my past and you're denying me my possibility of my future. So we've always wanted to be identified as people, right? And I use this analogy that nobody calls a pastor a sinner. You don't judge him on where he's been, you judge him on where he's going, right? So that's what we want. So when you look at policymakers, there's an agitation right now, and we put that roadmap out. We released it a week after the inauguration. My media team was like, we shouldn't do it, it's too much going on. I was like, just do it, get it placed, and we can go back to it. Well, part of the executive order was that language. And just yesterday, Donald Trump put out a memo to all staff, cabinet leaders, personnel, White House visitors, They cannot use the word felon. And if they do, actions, although it's personal, I don't care. It moved the needle for 70 million people who have a criminal background. So you have to look for that opportunity, and it's not about you, it's bigger than you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so from a policy standpoint, as a public safety director in Arizona, I deal with 90 different legislators and the governor. It's a challenge because you will have a lot of bad policy that will come out of different initiatives that they want to kickstart. So I work with my lobbyists, and many times there's different things that are coming across the desk that they're initiating new policies, and a lot of those times I have to be the naysayer. I have to come out and write briefs and say, look, you can't do this because it's not constitutionally legal to do. Because they will come up with any and every idea that you can possibly think of. And it's incumbent upon me and my office to basically shut a lot of it down. Now, doesn't mean that I can play field goal, hockey with them the entire time, because you're going to have things that are going to slide through that you just can't prevent. But that's a part of the role, though, is to make sure that you level set and ensure that you're getting them on the path to creating good policy that's meaningful, that's not actually impacting Black and brown communities, and that's a responsibility that I have. But you also have to be, it's also like threading a needle in a sense, because I can't completely, impact everything that they're doing, but there's a lot of things that I can make sure that there's good positive change that's implemented. Now, in terms of just being able to work with the community and, issues that come up with in terms of funding, that's where I rely heavily on partnerships, partnering with nonprofits, partnering with other organizations, whether it be out of the scope of law enforcement, or it could be healthcare. It could, and that's the whole thing with when you're looking at things from an ecosystem, is that you're not just looking at what your profession does, you're looking at everything that everybody does. So that way you can start leveraging the relationships to be able to make sure that you're creating the betterment for the community in a whole. Because quite frankly, if I don't have to go out and have people get arrested, then I'm doing my job, because we've put in some programs and we worked with people on different initiatives that kept people out of jail and kept them from going out there and conducting the behaviors that that are illegal, or that are driving them to substance abuse or things of that nature. So it's putting the right people and the right organizations first, and ensuring that they have that voice. And then sometimes it's for us to take a step back and let them work, but we're working in the background alongside of them.
I'm going to piggyback on a few things, but we're talking legislatively, and I'm going to speak specifically to Ann Arbor. In Ann Arbor, I'm fortunate because I have a city leadership, our city council, mayor, and our city administrator are very supportive of efforts that we can employ to help people in the community. And whether that be by funding, providing funding with respect to my police budget, to also I have an opportunity to reach out to the University of Michigan, who's very, very supportive of community efforts, and many other fiduciary, very responsible business people in our community that care. And so getting funding for us is something that we'll continue to be able to ascertain from a business standpoint as well as a municipality. There is not a great focus on what's taking place at the national level with respect to funding. We still need to go about doing our job. We understand that there are people left and right that care about the community. We're looking for those individuals to help continue to move the mantle forward. So we're very fortunate from that respect. That's what we're doing. I'm empowered to make those decisions. I'm empowered to work with the community. And one thing, as we mentioned a little bit about crime, the reality is there is just a small number of people that engage in crime on a regular basis. It's not as widespread as anyone would like to say. And even that small number of people, they have other reasons that lead them to those issues, social concerns that we can actually intervene once we have the right resources in place. So it's a matter of just, as I indicated, working to find ways to help and cultivate solutions with nonprofit, our business, and our city leadership in order to help people. And I think in Ann Arbor, we have a very safe community, and it's because we have great leadership that supports the direction we go.
Beautiful. So we have about 10 minutes left. You all said a lot, but I would love to, if you could just, what is the number one thing, me working in one of the largest gun safety organizations in the country, and we're very white, we don't get it right? So going back to work on Tuesday, and I work with mayors and obviously police, and you have nonprofit organizations, what is the one thing that you all want us to think about better in the context of becoming a resource or being advocates, or things you don't want us to do anymore? Because some of the things that we've been doing over the last 30 years, I'm 32, so it was on y'all, but over the last 30 years have just been taking us around circles. And so I would love to know what you all think and final thoughts of, like, what are y'all doing, we're doing right? What do you need to do more of? What do y'all need in the position of leadership that y'all are in? And yeah.
Well, I think first, really quickly, on you talk about gun violence, and there's a word that is not commonly used as much as we would like, and it's the word respect. I mean, when you really boil down to it and you talk to a young person that engages in a gun battle, oftentimes it's because they were disrespected. And in this community, in our culture, there's a lot we can learn from feeling disrespected. And so we really haven't really drilled down in that. Some of the things that I think we're doing a good job with is there's a lot of conversations with respect to how we can change the mantle and move things forward to encourage not just activists, working with nonprofit, working with the police, working with corrections, working with everyone in order to try to solve some of the social concerns we have. However, the conversations need to translate into actions. That's the challenge that we're having. So we got to do a better job there.
So on a couple of notes, I think for me, I started out with the Cincinnati Initiative to Reduce Violence, right? Those were people who had a high propensity to commit a homicide or be the victim of a homicide. And one of the things that I discovered, one, was we had a culture of a percentage of the population that felt it unsafe not to have a gun on them, right? And I remember I told somebody to put their gun down. It was like, that's fine, you're telling me, but you ain't told him, right? So I'd rather be caught with my gun than be without my gun. And that was the reality of the community we were living in. And I remember sitting down saying, what are the resources? What are the resources that are necessary? And what I found out, even individuals who had not come into contact with the criminal legal system were still struggling with the same basic human needs as if they had went through the criminal legal system. Meaning, we were not pouring enough resources in our communities on the front end to ensure individuals were not getting involved in this activity. That why was drug addiction or drug selling the lucrative social economic status in certain communities, right? What was missing from those communities, and how do we pour those resources in? But I also want to go to funding, because being the person who used to run the federal government's investment in corrections and reentry, the Brine grant and all of that, what I've discovered is that is a needle in a haystack of money for the need across this country. When Colonel talked about being creative, man, every state gets federal dollars around transportation, around energy, around education. There's a Section 3 clause that says 35% of any federal funding that comes into your area, 35% of the workforce has to come from a marginalized population or zip code. So therefore, if $1.2 trillion just got released under Biden-Harris over 5 years for, I'm just going to say, highways, bridges, and clean water, every state got a portion of that. Ohio got $7.1 billion over 5 years to do 280 projects. 35% of that every year has to go to a marginalized population, or at-risk population, to work on those projects. Well, now you're talking about only the population being arrested and convicted in Ohio, which is a smaller number. And if you break it down to the percentage that has the potential to recidivate, man, you almost have access to $100,000 per person to invest in them. But most people don't know how to follow the money. They want the money that is identified and stamped for criminal justice and reentry without really, and I tell people, I started a Department of Reentry off of the police money that they confiscated from drug dealers. They had a pot of money that had a grant release, and I was like, I want to do this office, and I want to serve people who are returning to our community that people are saying are a threat to, and all I did was connect them to resources. And I got $200,000 from drug money that went back to the community. So even that became the narrative to the community of how our office was serving and that they were self-funding it. And if you don't want to fund me no more, I need you to stop selling drugs. But it was just being creative.
Preach. No, and seriously, that is one of the biggest things where people miss out on is we will have these traumas, we'll have these issues that are going on in different communities, but people don't understand the resources that are available to them. They don't always understand that there's really billions of dollars that are being given to each state to address problems or issues that are going on, and that money, that pot of money is being sort of like boiled down and taken into different initiatives. But a lot of times when it comes to our communities, our minority communities, a lot of that is not being equal access because people are not understanding where the money needs to be taken and provided, and how to really ask for it, and to say, hey, we've got a traffic safety equity issue in one part of our community or city where we're seeing a high issue of collisions that are occurring, and it's resulting in fatalities. And I don't know if people understand that or know that there's a lot of places in the United States where when you're talking about fatal deaths on the roadway, they look like us. And we don't talk enough about that, but that actually is happening. And then it's like, okay, well, what is being done in terms of seeking the solution, which we're doing a poor job of coming up with a solution because people don't understand the resources available to them to be able to go out and do that work. And then coming up with a long-term strategic planning, because once you've identified the problem, and then everybody gets upset, and we got to do this, we got to do that. Okay, well, what's the long-term plan? How do we actually build something sustainable that's going to provide equity, and what needs to be done to make sure that we're keeping those fatalities from actually happening, and that we're addressing the community problem, because those are mostly young lives that are being lost. And that's what people sometimes are not seeing, and they're not really getting it or understanding the numbers behind that. And that's what we see all the time.
I have one more question. I hear all the things that we should do, but, and this is probably a 32-year-old question. If we do not change, if we don't change, like evolve in policing, if we stay where we are, what do you think it's going to look like in 20 years? If we're not serving the folks who are coming out of the prisons, and especially just in this age of digital equity and things fast-pacing, like what does that look like?
So I guess one of the things, it's a good question, because if we're not dealing with many of the issues right now that we're seeing, and as we see more that's being done with AI, quantum computing, technology, we are going to find ourselves with several levies, several situations around the country, around the world, that are going to explode. It's going to be a powder keg. Because when people are not valued, when people don't feel like they're getting the resources that they need, when they're not getting some of the support to be able to be successful, You're going to see a lot of issues with crime. Crime will go up. You will see a lot of explosive actions that will take place, and you'll see a lot of, everything from protests to extreme violence that's going to take place. Because the other thing is that if those resources are not being shared, the public safety aspect of things, in terms of that reform initiative that was started back in the Obama era administration, you will see guerrilla warfare, military type tactics out of your police departments, because they will devolve into the dynamic of the situation that's occurring in front of them. And they're going to be reactionary, which is not what you want. You want them to be strategic, and you want them to work with the community, but they will stop working with the community, and it will become a guerrilla warfare situation.
And I actually think it's the opposite for the community, right? The community, if the community is not inclusive in the digital where we're moving to and we don't change, and we're constantly leaving a segment of the population behind in workforce, knowledge, and different things, they're going to result even more to survival needs. And a lot of times those survival needs clash with law enforcement. So now you're going to have that explosion again. Exactly, the precast system. So you're literally going to have this population or group of individuals who, for basic survival needs, have to put and grind down because we've excluded them from moving along in society. We've excluded them from being prosperous and actually being inclusive and belonging in society. So I always say insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. We have to advance.
But with Trump wanting to move everything like back to the states and like local, does that make you all nervous in terms of the work and in terms of capacity, like especially prison system, but also for officers on the street? They're actually trying to do their job.
Right.
So I think, one, you have to understand what he has power to move back to the states, because the criminal legal system in the states belong to the states. Any federal thing he does with the criminal legal system only impacts those who are incarcerated on federal crimes, right? So it's, what is he moving back to the states, and those different things of how you move from there. But there's also laboratories of democracy, and a lot of people and advocates don't think of this. This is where things take hold on the ground and forces government to change. Same-sex marriage. It didn't start federally and come down. It started across states, won lawsuits to pass it, and it forced federal government to change their laws. Legalization of marijuana is taking the same thing. States are legalizing marijuana. Federal government has it on their ballot. So there are some things we have to know where our power is based on the Constitution of how we can actually force federal government to change.
So I do agree. There's always a push with respect to how we make change. Frederick Douglass said, without struggle, there's no progress. So we know there's struggle, and we know we had to continue to push. But I will say this, first and foremost, when we talk about the future, any organization that is unwilling to adapt and be agile and make adjustments will fail. And we know that in law enforcement. And I think we are very aware of what can happen in the future. Our efforts to engage the community to become more part of the solutions we have, as Chief Glover said, bringing people to the table to talk about how we modify our practices will prevail. What we're doing now is we're bringing in people that understand the community a lot better. As I indicated before, we're engaging more. We're modifying our approach because our approach needs to change. We're looking at things from a diversity lens. We're looking at a lot of things that are occurring with respect to the impact and harm on people of color. And we're doing that, not just black leaders like me, but people that don't look like me. And as long as we continue to move in that path, we'll be fine. I think that the community has to continue to push law enforcement to make these adjustments. We work for you, not the other way around.
I just want to piggyback on that, because I think a lot of times while the chiefs and the police are focused on policy and culture within their department and community outward facing, what a lot of people don't see is those one-on-one conversations that I would have, right, with a police chief and say, You know why you're not solving more shootings? Because when individuals are victims and the police show up, they get treated like the perpetrator, right? Or how the uniform has a traumatic experience when you walk in. And I remember having that conversation with our police chief, and he literally assigned 2 to 3 guys. They were the only ones who was responding to the hospital when shootings happened. And I remember sitting in the hospital with a victim, and the guys walked in, and they identified themselves as police. And I remember the guy saying, man, I don't trust police. And they were like, we don't either. But it was just the psychological of the relationship, but they didn't show up in their white shirt. They had on their T-shirts, their jeans, and it was building a trusting relationship that, one, I'm not going to treat you like a perpetrator or that you deserve to be shot. I'm going to treat you like a victim, and my job is to help solve who shot you so that you don't go back out and retaliate, and this city stays in this vicious cycle of retribution.
Yeah, just to add to that, just real quick, I'll be brief, but the real work comes in when those one-on-one conversations, when community members reach out to you, and you sit down and have a cup of coffee or a drink or whatever, and they basically tell you, what's working, what's not, and they're holding you accountable. They're holding you accountable to the things, the actions that you say that you are committed to in the community, and you follow through with bringing about the change and the reform that needs to be made. But it comes through from being able to have a lot of those one-on-one dialogues. It's not a community forum. It's just those private conversations that you're having with influential people within the community that are bringing up these issues, and you're working together in tandem to help make the change happen.
Yeah, I can agree more. And, a lot of times people ask me what was done in Ferguson to actually offset the protests. And people thought it was real difficult. And of course, there were some challenges. But the things that I'll kind of tie into what we're talking about here, first of all, my focus was with grandmothers, mothers, and pastors. That was it. That was my total focus. However, what we talked about here, as I indicated, frequency of positive interactions. That's what we're talking about. It's not that hard. When you have frequency of positive interaction, it does build trust. The other one I spoke about, as we're saying here, judgment. When you're judging people, it's not that hard. There's no complicated task there. When you're not out there judging people and you're loving them and they show you're authentic and you're genuine, when they see police officers, like you said, when you see that, we build trust, we change hearts, we modify, and the last thing is we just got to care. Those are the people we need in leadership.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be up here with you all. I'm going to go into questions. We have a few minutes left if anyone has questions for the panelists.
Just to follow up to something you said yesterday, that law enforcement, you asked us if law enforcement had showed up and asked us how we wanted to be policed. Have you ever actually done that? And if so, what was the feedback you got from that?
I actually have. So yeah, I don't bring those things up to say hypotheticals. Like, that's something that I actually did, because it was one of those things where when you grow up in an organization, a police organization, and you get the directive of the day and everything, and then at some point in your mind, especially for somebody of color that's going out there and doing this job every day, the thought crossed my mind that, if I was ever to lead an agency, I would actually ask people how they want to be policed. Because it's just a simple notion. It's about being able to understand what the community needs truly are. And if I'm telling you what you need, then I'm really not listening. I'm just telling you, I'm just talking. And, I always say this phrase, God gave us 2 ears, but he only gave us 1 mouth. So sometimes you just need to shut up and listen to what people are telling you, so that way you can take it in and take it to heart, so that way you can make the change that needs to be made. But a lot of times, egos get in the way, and we know best because we know our job, and don't tell me how to do my job, but yet you pay me to do my job. So it's taking the ego out of it and asking the question, truly, like, hey, what can we do better? and how do you want to be policed? I did that in Tempe. I've done that with the Department of Public Safety, which is a little bit tougher because it's the entire state. So I'm getting different answers when I'm out and about and everything. But you know, that's the sort of the nuance of it all, is that not every area is the same. Not every organization, you know, because when you're talking about a agency that is statewide, I'm dealing with local, I'm dealing with county, I'm dealing with federal as well. And so they all treat, it's all very different. But I want to make sure that for my agency that we're being fair and we're treating people with the dignity and the respect that they deserve, and they're getting that procedural justice. So we will change exactly how we police in terms of how we conform with community standards, but I can't account for everybody else.
Oh, sorry. I guess this is a follow-up to that question, because you were talking about listening to the community and what they want, but I was wondering, what are methods you found are effective for changing other people in your same position about trying to implement some of the changes you found effective? Because I feel like even if you have proof, it might not always be enough.
No, that's a good question, and that's a very tough thing because you know it goes back to the egos that I talked about. You know, egos within law enforcement is a huge thing, especially when you're talking about chief executives, chiefs of police. Everybody knows they're the best, but I think that it's being able to actually, when I go to different places, whether it be sitting in a board meeting at Noble, sitting in a board meeting at the International Association of Chiefs of Police for IACP, but talking about how I am actually engaging with community in that way and asking that question, it makes other leaders think about, you know what, I hadn't really considered it. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Maybe that's something, even if they don't want to admit it, I know that they're asking themselves that question, because I had the experience of a couple coming to me asking me, well, how did you actually do that? Because they're trying to figure out how to better connect with their community members, and I tell them, it's like there's a certain layer of vulnerability you're going to have, and you're going to have to allow for your ego to get out of the way, because they're going to tell you what they really think, and you can't be argumentative. That's how they feel. Go with it and understand it, and just try to listen and hear them out, because that's how you're going to be able to move forward hand in hand.
I want to, and not being in the police department, I think one thing that we learn from a community is how the community see the police, right? So when you talk about culture shift, and I remember we were talking about changing culture in Cincinnati because we were one of the cities after we had an uprising that had a consent decree that's kind of been held as but our police department has two fraternal orders of police, one for the blacks and one for the whites. So how can you culturally breed? And so that was a challenge that we had to continue to push back on. How can you culturally say you're a culturally sensitive police organization to the community when you're not culturally sensitive internally? So your house has to be cleaned on the inside before it actually shows up outside. And typically, we were, for the first time, had an outside police chief come in from outside. So a lot of times cities push back because they want the homegrown who is accustomed to how it is versus that outside expertise who can think outside the box. And when you step into that as a police chief, what I found out is that you have to come with a level of confidence, a level of knowledge, because not only are your elected officials that hire you, your mayor, city council, going to push back on you, your own police department is going to push back on you, right? And who becomes your number one ally becomes the community, to be able to hold the police department and the elected officials accountable.
Okay.
Wow, that's amazing that you said that, and it is 100% true. Having an opportunity, I've come into many agencies from the outside. There's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, and when we're talking about changing, I have an oversight commission, an exceptional oversight commission. You have to embrace oversight commissions, bring them to the table. They will help you develop plans to change. But some of the things I've done as I work with and for Chief Glover is we use leadership principles to change people. One thing is we try to encourage people to change, but I also use forced cohesion. And forced cohesion is something that you've seen when we had to integrate school systems and we forced people to change. And I use that with the police department. So the change comes in developing leaders that modify the direction, but real honestly, you have to have really strong leadership at the top level. And you have to be strong or as strong as the people that push back. And you have to use discipline and accountability to change behavior. And then, as indicated, you need the community support in order to do that. But this is an occupation. You work here. You either comply or you go. And that's just the way that I see it.
Force cohesion. I'm gonna use that on my siblings and my daddy. But thank you guys. We're wrapping up. You okay? You got.
I'll ask a question at this time.
This is it's up to my brother in the hat.
Well, a lot of pressure. Yeah.
Okay. I don't need a microphone.
Okay.
But first, I just want to say I appreciate your genuine commitments to your communities and taking the opportunity to express it. And all of you have dedicated a tremendous amount of your life and reasons that are clearly resonate and push you in a fantastic direction. And I was just in another panel right before this where they talked a lot about meeting people at that level. And one of the previous questions that you guys asked was about, if you don't change the way things are going right now, where they're going to evolve to. And Chief Glover, you said you came from someone that statistically said that you shouldn't be where you are today. But you also used the word that kind of tweaked my ear, and I'm not forming the question in the way that's like stuff the chunk, but you specifically used that you were concerned about communities regressing to like a form of guerrilla warfare. So, and it's a very specific, and clearly somebody that's been in a community so much, you specifically selected that. And I was curious to know, what have you seen in your past that says that, hey, if we don't do it, we're going to regress to that, or do you think that we're there right now?
So I come from the city of Compton. The city of Compton had a police department, right? They don't have one no more. They don't have a police department anymore because it was disbanded for corruption in the early 2000s, 99, 2000. They disbanded the police department. They got rid of it. You're looking at like situations like Rampart and all of that. All of that was connected back to Compton PD as well. They had people that were on task force. They had people that were stealing drugs out of evidence lockers. They were going out there shaking down drug dealers. They were stealing. The level of corruption was so bad within that city that not only did it disband the police department by the DOJ come in and disband it, but you had a mayor that went to prison, and you had council members that were jailed. And those are some of the things that I'm talking about, where you'll have things that will blow up to a certain extent within a community because you have corruption that is now set into it because you've allowed for this culture to permeate throughout the entire organization. And right now, they are still dealing with issues that, like LA County Sheriffs, where you have gang members that are on the police department, and they actually have formed gangs, and they've actually beaten up other officers if they're not a part of their gang. Look it up and Google it. You'll see. It was just last year, an article came out on that. So those are some of the things that I'm talking about.